Good afternoon. It's great to be here with you today. So I'll give an update across our SolarWinds work. What happened, how did it happen, and what are we doing about it? So first, what happened? Hackers launched a broad and indiscriminate effort to compromise the network management software used by both government and the private sector. The intelligence community is looking at who is responsible. Until that study is complete, I'll use the language we previously used, which was to say an advanced persistent threat actor, likely of Russian origin, was responsible. As of today, 9 federal agencies and about 100 private sector companies were compromised. As you know, roughly 18,000 entities downloaded the malicious update, so the scale of potential access far exceeded the number of known compromises. Many of the private sector compromises are technology companies, including networks of companies whose products could be used to launch additional intrusions. So why does this matter? Why is this significant? The techniques that were used lead us to believe that any files or emails on a compromised network were likely to be compromised. The scope and scale of our investigation is underway, and we look forward to providing you future updates in the future. So how did this happen? There's 2 parts to that, them and us. The actor was a sophisticated, advanced persistent threat. Advanced, because the level of knowledge they showed about the technology and the way they compromised it truly was sophisticated. Persistent, they focused on the identity part of the network, which is the hardest to clean up. And threat, the scope and scale to networks, to information, makes this more than an isolated case of espionage. And then us. There's a lack of domestic visibility. So as a country, we choose to have both privacy and security. So the intelligence community largely has no visibility into private sector networks. The hackers launched the hack from inside the United States, which further made it difficult for the US government to observe their activity. Even within federal networks, a culture and authorities inhibit visibility, which is something we need to address. I want to take a moment to thank the public and private sector network defenders who've been working very hard to find and expel these adversaries from both government and private sector networks. So finally, and most significantly, what are we going to do about it? 3 things. First, finding and expelling the adversary. Second, building back better to modernize federal defenses and reduce the risk of this happening again. And finally, potential response options to the perpetrators. So first, finding and expelling the adversary. We're coordinating the interagency response from the National Security Council. I was on the Hill last week, had Hill discussions this week, and will be on the Hill next week as well. We're working closely with daily conversations with our private sector partners. They have visibility and technology that is key to understanding the scope and scale of compromise. There are legal barriers and disincentives to the private sector sharing information with the government that is something we need to overcome. And then finally, this is challenging. This is a sophisticated actor who did their best to hide their tracks. We believe it took them months to plan and execute this compromise. It'll take us some time to uncover this layer by layer. Second, building back better to modernize federal defenses. We're absolutely committed to reducing the risk this happens again. If you can't see a network, you can't defend a network. And federal networks, cybersecurity, need investment and more of an integrated approach to detect and block such threats. We're also working on close to about a dozen things, likely 8 will pass, that'll be part of an upcoming executive action to address the gaps we've identified in our review of this incident. And finally, in terms of response to the perpetrator, discussions are underway. I know some of you will want to know what kind of options are being contemplated. What I will share with you is how I frame this in my own mind. This isn't the only case of malicious cyber activity of likely Russian origin, either for us or for our allies and partners. So as we contemplate future response options, we're considering holistically what those activities were. I look forward to coming back and keeping you posted as we continue identifying the scope and scale and continue our execution. And thank you so much for your time.
Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead, Phil.
Thanks, Anne, for doing this. Just to 30,000 footage, do you have a time frame in terms of how long this investigation will take? And then Obviously, you're not going to lay out specific details of what you will do in response, but do you have a timeline on the response as well to tag to whenever the investigation ends, or how are you guys thinking through that?
So most importantly, as we're looking at what caused the SolarWinds, we're also executing the three things I talked about. We're working to expel the adversary, we're working to build those networks and improve the cybersecurity of federal networks, and we're also carefully thinking through how we respond. So the investigation, as I noted, because of the sophistication, it's taking us layer by layer, but we're working at the same pace to ensure we lock down networks and really think through how to ensure this doesn't happen again in the future.
And do you have a timeline? I understand it's complicated, but how long it would take to go layer by layer and really understand the scope?
I think we're estimating several months, but as I said, literally, day by day, hour by hour, we're making progress in understanding it.
Mary?
As you look at the scope and the scale of this, do you have a price tag or a sense of a price tag that could begin to account the total cost of damage to the U.S. government from this compromise?
It's a really interesting question. There's two parts, right? One is it's really highlighted the investments we need to make in cybersecurity to have the visibility to block these attacks in the future. And then the second is the scale of the information that was potentially compromised and the impact of how that information could be used in the hands of a malicious actor. So there's certainly a cost with regard to dollars. It's also a cost with regard to national security, and we're bounding and understanding both.
And there's been some discussion that entire networks could have to be scrapped and rebuilt essentially from the ground up. I know, you don't want to get into specifics of a timeline, but are we talking about years potentially to try and secure some of these networks going forward?
We certainly don't have years. It's wise when planning in cybersecurity to consider the worst case, particularly when you're dealing with such a sophisticated attacker in that way. So we know we don't have years, and the remediation, the fix and cleanup work is underway already. And we'll be doing it in a careful way to ensure that we lock down layer by layer. But we know it's going to be a lot shorter than that.
But, and what have we specifically learned about this attack in terms of kind of the data that was stolen and, agencies that were impacted? We know the number, but what kind of communications were really impacted by this hack?
Good question. One of the things we've done from the White House is do a coordinated set of questions to assess that and pull that piece together. It varies agency by agency, and certainly there is national security impact, and that is what we're looking to consider, both how we manage the risk of that and how we address it for the future.
And do we have any understanding of kind of the motive that drove this attack? I mean, based on the assessment that you've had, what were the hackers really trying to go after? I mean, any particular agency out of the 9 that you found that they were going after?
Certainly, as we look at the agencies, there are a number of those of high foreign intelligence interest to a foreign government. So we know that was certainly one goal. But as I noted earlier, when there is a compromise of this scope and scale, both across government and across the U.S. technology sector to lead to follow-on intrusions, it is more than a single incident of espionage. It's fundamentally of concern for the ability for this to become disruptive.
Go ahead. You had your hand raised for a while.
Since this involved both government agencies and the private sector as well, how much are you able to share with the private sector as far as what may have been compromised on their end and what they can do maybe to prevent this from happening again?
In the U.S. government, in the United States, the way we're structured, public-private partnership has to be a core part of national cyber defense. So there's active sharing going on in both directions. Government sharing its insights with private sector entities, both who have been compromised and those who have broader visibility, and private sector entities sharing their insights to ensure we can together scope and scale what occurred.
Can you do one more question? Go ahead.
Do you believe you'll find additional U.S. agencies and private companies that have been hacked, or is this the final number? And have you ruled out data deletion or manipulation?
So due to the sophistication of the techniques that were used, we believe we're in the beginning stages of understanding the scope and scale, and we may find additional compromises, particularly given the technology companies that were compromised. And no, we have not ruled out potential additional activity, but we're very focused on carefully taking this step by step to understand the broad implications.
Thank you, Anne, so much. And we, of course, would love to have you back anytime. I'm sure.
Thank you all.
Thank you.